On this episode of Roadkill's Junkyard Gold, we're back at K&K Motors Incorporated, exploring the world of Buick muscle. We're going fast with class. I'm Steve Mignonti, hot rod historian, author, and lover of all things cars. I travel all across the country to uncover the forgotten and hidden gems of the automotive world. This is Roadkill's Junkyard Gold. When better cars are built, Buick will build them. That was one of Buick's better-known ad campaigns. On this episode of Roadkill's Junkyard Gold, we're in Graham, Texas at K&K Motors, where over 10,000 cars cover 67 acres. Among them are many great examples of Buick muscle just waiting to be explored. (1967) was the year that Chevrolet and Buick both launched their 350 cubic inch V8 engines. How do you tell them apart? They're both red when they were new. Well, here's the thing. The Chevy small block has its ignition distributor on the back of the engine. The Buick put it up front on the driver's side, where it's a little bit easier to service. Digging deeper, when you pull the valve cover off, inside of a Chevy, you'll find stamped steel rocker arms with ball stud mounts, while Buick used shaft-mounted rocker arms mounted on pedestals. And the rocker arms are die-cast metal. So the Chevy and Buick 350s are similar, but not the same. Dodge Power Ram 150 all-wheel drive half-ton pickup, 67 El Camino. Oh, a Buick Riviera. Now, this one's a 1966. This is the second generation Riviera. Now, the first Riviera launched in 1963, and it was Buick's first personal luxury car. By 1966, the wheelbase grew from 209 to 211 inches, and curb weight blossomed from 4,141 to 4,316 pounds. These were big cars, and they were only available as two-door coupes. The thing that makes this one stand out is the fact that it has these GS logos on the fenders and up on the grille. That means that somebody paid $176.82 for RPO A9, the Grand Sport package, which transformed a Riviera into a senior muscle car. Now, in 1965, the first year for the Grand Sport, that would have meant a 425 with dual Carter 4-barrel carburetors, but for 1966, dual quads were relegated to an option on top of the Grand Sport. So what this one has is the big 425 in its final year with a Rochester Quadrajet intake manifold. Kind of weird. The spread-bore Rochester Quadrajet, which was a very modern carburetor designed for fuel efficiency, was installed on the antique nailhead. So to see a Rochester Quadrajet manifold on a nailhead is a really rare one-year piece. An additional $179 would have got the optional Super Wildcat dual quad 425 with 370 horsepower. But this thing packs 340 horse, which is plenty to move this thing down the road. And also, it has 465 foot-pounds of torque. I do see on this one, it has the standard power brakes and power steering, optional air conditioning, and 1966 was the final year for the single-circuit master cylinder. One detail found on all 1965 through 69 Rivieras is hideaway headlights. Hit the switch, and these things rotate in an up position, giving you a full grille effect. And it looks kind of weird with the headlights hanging like this, but the hood came down and covered them up. That was the whole deal on this design. Inside, even though the Grand Sport transformed the Riviera into a muscle car, one thing you couldn't get in any Riviera was four on the floor. In fact, no manual transmissions of any kind were ever offered in Riviera from the beginning to the end. In this one, we see the automatic shifted up on the steering column, would have been a Turbo 400 underneath the floor. An option would have been a console shifted automatic between the front seats. And speaking of seats, 66 was the first year that Riviera could be had with the standard front bench seat, which for the first time made it a possible 6-passenger car. This one has the strato buckets, which were an option, and because of the column-shifted automatic, it has the abbreviated center console. If this was ordered with the floor-shifted automatic, it would have a full-length console. 1966 also brought a new rear axle. Even though this second-generation Buick Riviera has the 425 cubic inch nailhead, the Buick engineers knew that for 1967, the 430 cubic inch second generation Buick V8 would arrive. That would eventually go to 455 cubic inches with 500 foot-pounds of torque, so a new rear axle was needed. This is a Salisbury-style rear axle, and inside here we find a large 9-inch ring gear. This car, being a Grand Sport, should have a positive traction differential. Well, I see an open differential on this one, so somebody's been in here. They probably robbed the limited slip differential and put it into another car. But I do see the 323 gear ratio in this one, which was standard on Grand Sport. Standard Rivieras would have had a 307 axle ratio with a thinner gear. The 323 gear set gave these cars a little bit better acceleration. But this is a good example of the monster axle seen from 66 on up, including the big 12-inch finned iron drum brakes seen on all Buicks from about 1959 all the way up into the early 1970s. In total, there were 45,348 Rivieras built in 1966, an all-time high sales number. But of them, only 5,718 were Grand Sport muscle cars. Makes it special. So I think I'd be forced to restore this car back to original condition. I'd respray it, its medium green metallic, reinstall the vinyl top, but I'd change one thing. I'd find a factory dual quad setup for the 425 and then show the world you could still get full-size Buick muscle cars with dual quads as late as 1966. These are Datsun Z cars, mid-80s. These things got larger and larger. They started out in 1971 as the 240Z, a very, very pure sports car. That's a 280ZX. This is a 3000Z, V6 power. By the time you get to these things, these are pretty good sports cars. Oh, and a 71 Firebird. Now, Buick never got their own pony car. You have to wonder, what might it have been like? I'm going to guess they might have called it Wildcat or maybe Skylark. The early 70s were not a good time for pony cars. In fact, Camaro sales were down 8.6%. Javelin was down 4%. Mustang sales were down 24% on that big Gen 2 version. Barracuda and Challenger down 66 and 64%. And Cougar was down 13%. Only Firebird enjoyed an increase of 9% over 1970. So was there room for a Buick pony car? No way. This one was an Esprit, not a Formula or Trans Am, so this one has the standard 352 barrel, which was the base V8 in Firebird. VIN in this thing reads, oh wow, 10006. This is the 6th car off the Van Nuys California line. Earlier this season, on episode 23, we saw a 67 Camaro number 125. That, too, was a very special early car. So we call these pilot cars. They're built in slow motion to help the line workers get a better handle on what's different about the new model year cars versus last year's cars. Are they worth more? Sometimes. Pilot cars have been known to contain prototype parts. If you pull the headliner down or the cardboard door panels, you might find prototype markings or differences in them versus full production cars. So they can be pretty cool. But this 71 Pontiac begs the question, what would a Buick pony car have been like? It's a question we'll never know the answer to. '71 Camaro, '73 Monte Carlo, two very different takes on a two-door personal car. Chevy Silverado Model 20, 3+3 cab. Oh, and a 1969 Buick Skylark GS 400. That hood doesn't lie. You know, Buick was one of the first companies to mate a small car and a big engine with the 1936 Century, which was the compact special with the V8 heart of the Roadmaster. But by 1960, the muscle car movement was starting to kick in, and Buick was falling behind. By 1965, Buick launched its first muscle car in the form of the GS 400, and by 1968, the second generation of the Skylark was out. This is a 69, but it suffers from something called sweep spear styling. Sweep spear styling was a Buick styling trait that started in 1949 and consisted of a long line coming down the side of the car. Kind of made the car look either graceful or like it was melting. You choose. But by 1968 and 69, it made the car look heavy. People didn't really like them, and the sales of these things fell behind. But one thing I love about the GS 400 is the hood scoop. It really works. Wow, what a rare treat. This is fully intact. Now, you gotta remember, in 1969, Chevelle didn't even offer cold air hoods, and on a 442 Oldsmobile or Pontiac GTO, you paid plenty extra for the W30 or the Ram Air. Here on the GS 400, it was standard equipment. It consists of a round air cleaner with a pair of dual snorkels that seal against the bottom of the hood scoops. These draw cool air into the engine, which is cooler and denser and allows the engine to make more horsepower. But you might wonder, with these scoops facing up to the sky, what about rain? What about snow? Little tiny holes here allowed rain and moisture to drain out down the bottom. Underneath this air cleaner, we see the original Rochester Quadrajet, which is similar to the carburetor we saw on the '66 Buick Riviera. The 400 engine in this car is a second-generation Buick V8, not to be confused with the 401 nailhead used in '65 and '66 GS400s. This engine is actually quite a bit better. It's got bigger valves, 2-inch intakes, and 1.62 exhaust valves, which are 18% larger than the valves used in the nailhead. And that helped the power of the 400 jump from 325 to a full 340. And this 400 made 440 foot-pounds of torque. This one is so complete, it's cool to see the bracket that supports the front of the dual snorkel air cleaner. That part is usually missing after so many years. Okay, let's find out what transmission this one has. While the full-size Buick Riviera Grand Sport could never be had with a manual transmission, the Skylark Grand Sport started with a 3-speed stick and then worked up to a 4-speed manual. This one has the Turbo 400 automatic, which cost an additional $227.04. While the GS400 was a specific model which cost $334 more than a basic Skylark, Buick still charged extra for popular items like the straddle front bucket seats and the center console. This one does have the standard Buick steering wheel, which is not very pretty, but there was a Corvette-inspired wood rim steering wheel for $31.60. What kind of rear axle did Buick put under the GS400? Let's find out. Okay. Well, I don't see the limited slip tag on this one, which doesn't surprise me. Back in '69, Buick charged an additional $42.13 for what they called their positive traction axle. The rear axle used under this car was the BOP 10-bolt, which was launched in 1964. It's a medium-duty axle, but the good news is the skinny tires installed on muscle cars back in the '60s and early '70s would have preserved it from major stress. But if you add slicks to these things, especially with a stick shift, the clock was ticking. The base price of the GS400 in 1969 was $3,181. Sounds like a bargain. Well, an SS396 Chevelle was $282 less, a Pontiac GTO was $80 less, or a 442 Oldsmobile for $31 less. So it's no wonder that Buick only sold 8,132 of these cars. The competition had them covered. But it's a true muscle car and deserves to live on. I wouldn't squander $100,000 in a concourse restoration, but for about $10,000, we could revive this car and make it presentable, and then show it to the world and prove that Buick Ram Air systems were free. Dodge pickup mid-50s, curved windshield, 2-piece hood, job rated, and a couple of Jeep Wagoneers. Now, was Buick involved in the SUV market in the '60s? No or yes? The Jeep Wagoneer from 1967 through 1971 used a Buick 350. Here's the story. The Wagoneer was launched in '63, and at that point in time was strictly 6-cylinder powered. For 1965, Jeep went to Rambler and borrowed their 327 V8 as an option. When Rambler dropped the 327 after 1966, Jeep turned to General Motors, which then allowed them to utilize the 350 Dauntless V8, which was a Buick. But here's the thing. In 1971, American Motors bought Jeep and replaced the GM-sourced 350 with their own 360s and 401s. Trouble is, both of these engines have the distributor up front and look pretty similar, which has caused a lot of confusion at the parts store over the years. So how do you tell the difference? Here's the quick tip. You look at the passenger side of the engine. If you see the oil filter prominently displayed, you know you're looking at a Buick. Now you know. The Junkyard is like a morgue, except parts are for sale. Instead of pulling the parts in real time, a lot of junkyards will grab the parts, harvest them off the cadavers, the cardavers. Nothing goes to waste in the junkyard, if you're doing it right. Headlights, throttle bodies, steering columns. Oh, and a red Buick GS 455. This is a 1970 Grand Sport convertible. This is the year that things got very real at General Motors. All through the 1960s, mid-sized cars were limited to a 400 cubic inch displacement maximum. Meanwhile, Fords had 428s, Mopars had 440s. GM was kind of behind the ball until 1970. Now, the 1970 455 grew out of the second generation Buick, which was a 430 cubic inch engine introduced in 1967. Basically, Buick gave the 430 125 thousandths overbore, which resulted in the 455. Torque went from 475 foot-pounds to 510 foot-pounds, an awesome amount of torque for a mid-sized car. And the great thing about all Buick Grand Sports from 1969 through 72 is they came standard with cold air induction. This is a different setup than we saw in that 69, which had a power dome. For 70 through 72, Buick went to these flush-mounted ducts, which feed air to the same kind of an air cleaner underneath. Okay, let's see if that 455 is still in place. Okay, somebody robbed it. And before we believe this car is really a GS 455, we have to go to the trim tag. And yeah, 446, verifying this is absolutely nothing less than a GS 455 convertible. Paint code 75 tells us this car was always flame red. It's not a respray, so a very special car. Now, see here, we do have air conditioning, which is a $376 option, power steering, $105, power brakes for $64. Another detail specific to the GS 455 is a very special motor mount. The stamped steel mounts used on 350 and 400 cars were tearing, and as a result, the 455's got these cast steel motor mounts. Believe it or not, the base transmission on the GS 455 was the 3-speed manual with a floor shifter. Only 18 convertibles were built with the 3-speed manual in 1970. Beyond that, 126 were built with the 4 on the floor, but this is one of 1,040 built with the Turbo 400 automatic transmission. A good automatic, heavy-duty internals, high upshift governor, and wide-open throttle, this thing would shift to 5,500 RPM, nearly 1,000 RPM higher than a 350 cubic inch Buick Skylark. To save cost, Buick shared the same instrument cluster between coupes and convertibles, but with one difference. There's an insert for the power convertible top control lever. This switch triggers an electric pump, which then pumps hydraulic fluid, raises the roof so you can have closed enjoyment, or, of course, lowers it on a sunny day. With 455 cubic inches, there were 510 foot-pounds of torque, one of the highest numbers in the industry. Let's see what kind of rear axle Buick used. Well, that's a surprise. That is a Chevelle 12-bolt. We know that because the bottom bolts are side by side. What this car would have been born with was something called the BOP 10-bolt rear axle. In fact, we saw one in that 69 GS 400 a couple of minutes ago. And the name BOP stands for Buick Olds Pontiac, as in they were used in all 3 of those makes. Inside the BOP 10-bolt is a ring gear that's only 8.2 inches in diameter, pretty small for a 455 cubic inch engine. And by contrast, the 66 Riviera GS that we saw had that big 9 3/8 inch ring gear. For whatever reasons, Buick never adopted the big axle for these cars, even with the 455. Now, this being a convertible will also be built on a special frame with boxed side members and 4 additional body mounts to compensate for the stiffness lost by the convertible body style. The base price of this GS 455 convertible in 1970 was $3,469, $23 less than a GTO convertible, which gave you a 400 cubic inch engine. For $23, I'll take those 55 cubic inches. As one of only 1,184 built, this car deserves to be restored, and best of all, it's a rust-free Texas shell. Now, the engine and tranny are missing, so it's not like it's ever going to be numbers matching. So I'd restore the car, I'd spray it flame red, revive the white interior and white top, but I'd have some fun with the engine. Grab a TA Performance aluminum block, aluminum heads, and then pack it full of a Moldex 4.5-inch stroker crank. That would give us 540 cubic inches, and then go chase Chevelle LS6s without fear. The 80s and 90s were the era of minivans and front-wheel drive, right? Well, not so fast. Buick had a better idea in 1991 when they relaunched the great American station wagon with the Roadmaster Estate. These were built between 1991 and 1996, and the great thing about these was the Vista Dome roof, which was a throwback to the Buick Sport Wagon and Olds Vista Cruiser of the 1960s. But best of all, these were all V8 powered, and this one has the heart of a Corvette. That's the LT1, which is the second-gen small block Chevy. These were installed in 94 through 96 Roadmaster estates. The earlier ones used a standard first-generation 350 with 180 horsepower. The Gen 2 LT1 bumped that up by 80 horsepower to 260 horsepower, thanks to high-flow exhaust manifolds, aluminum cylinder heads, crank trigger ignition, reverse cooling, and they even went so far as to get rid of the drag of the mechanical fan, replacing it with an electric water pump. It's the little details that add up. This is the engine oil cooler, which was only available with the trailer towing package. And that tells us the differential in this car will have a limited slip with 294 gears versus the 276 gears used in standard non-trailer towing vehicles. These cars were all built at General Motors' Arlington, Texas plant, which is about 108 miles away from where we're standing here in Graham, Texas at K&K Motors. So this car isn't that far from where it was born. But we can thank Buick for giving the great American rear-wheel drive station wagon one last gasp. '65 Thunderbird. Like most junkyards, K&K Motors take some of their better cars and they put them in the front line instead of stacking them up. I get it. Cars like this, 69 AMX, 4-speed, stripes, it's a go-pack car. And speaking of stripes, if that's what I think it is, it's a Buick GSX, which was launched midway through 1970. It was basically the ultimate Buick muscle car. The GSX package was RPO code A9, and it added $1,195 to a basic GS 455, and included this crazy trunk spoiler and the graphics we see on it. The trouble is, GSXs were only sold in two colors, Saturn Yellow and Apollo White. This is obviously a red car, but again, these things often got resprayed, so let's add up the clues and see if it really is a GSX. If it is, it's one of only 678 made. Okay, GSX came standard with positive traction, and yeah, there's the tag on it that says use limited slip differential fluid only. To find out more, we have to go to the interior. Okay, well, this is good news and bad news. The good news, it's a bucket seat interior with a console with GS logos on the side panels. The bad news is the GSX only came with black interiors. This is a white interior. Now, it is possible the original black seats and panels were trashed at some point and replaced with white. I'm an optimist. Let's keep adding clues. For that, we go to the trim tag. Okay, as I make my way to the trim tag, I notice this. That's a drum brake, which could be had on a GS 455. But here's the thing. GSXs came standard with front power disc brakes. But it's possible this car was bought by somebody who enjoyed drag racing. Perhaps, along the way in the 1970s, they took those disc brakes off and replaced them with these drums. After all, the discs weigh about 15 pounds more than the drums. Let's assume that's the case. Okay, GSX emblem in the grille, present and accounted for. I don't see the hood tack that would be on top of the hood. That would be a standard item with the GSX. Okay, let's lift the hood and look at the paint code on the trim tag. And what do we have? Okay, code 75, fire red. It's not yellow, it's not white, so this cannot be a 1970 GSX. Instead, it appears to be an original GS 455 that's been given a GSX makeover. But the fender emblems that read Stage 1 are the next best thing. For an additional $157.43, the Stage 1 bumped the regular 455 from 350 to 360 horsepower. Torque stayed the same at 510, but the reality is 360 was more like 390 or 400. These things were seriously underrated. The intake valves went from 200 to 212. The exhaust valves, which were standard 162s, were enlarged to 175s. You got a hotter 490 lift camshaft. Compression went from 10 to 10.5 to 1. Additionally, the Stage 1 came with a richer quadrijet 4-barrel carburetor. Valve springs were doubles, which allowed the engine to rev over 6,000 RPM. And finally, every Stage 1 engine was topped with chrome valve covers. These cars were quick. In Motortrend's January 1970 issue, one of these things was tested and ran a low 13 at 105 miles per hour. And a lot of Hemi guys were jealous of these cars. They were darn quick. Now, this has been treated to some Day 2 modifications. There's an Edelbrock B4B dual-plane intake manifold, a Holley 4-barrel in the place of the Rochester quadrijet, and in place of the cast-iron exhaust manifolds, a set of headers. The only downside is that open-element 14-inch air cleaner defeats the factory ram air on this car. But this was somebody's weekend warrior. As a real deal 70 Stage 1 GS 455, this car deserves nothing but a stock restoration. So I'd go ahead and respray it fire red, give it a fresh white interior, and yeah, I'd even do the white vinyl top over again. But the one thing I would not add is the GSX tape stripes. They're not right for the car, and I'd get sick of people asking about them. Well, that's our show. Even though Buick was one of General Motors' more conservative divisions, we saw how they catered to the full-size muscle car market with that 1966 Riviera Grand Sport. The 69 GS 400 started Buick's trend of adding functional cold air systems to all GS Buicks without extra charge. And finally, that pair of 70 GS 455s had the Pontiac GTO covered by 55 cubic inches. These great Buicks all let their owners go fast with class. This is the final episode for this season. Check out Roadkill Extras for bonus content and great stuff that just wouldn't fit into the normal episodes. And to see what I'm up to, check out stevemags.com. Until next season, yes, we'll be back. Hasta mañana. On this episode of Roadkill's Junkyard Gold, it's all Sea-Doos all the time. On this episode of Roadkill's Junkyard Gold, I'm stuck inside of this diesel fuel tank. Look, I'm being held captive. Who needs satellite XM radio? We're exploring the exciting world of factory AM radios. Tesla, Schmesla. We're exploring the electrifying world of golf carts. Help. Get me out of here. I'm not kidding. Please help me. It's three-wheeled fun and a midnight sun. Woohoo!